Paul Leinster. I'm the Independent Chair of Water Resources East, and you're most welcome to this momentous event in the life of Water Resources East. This is the launch of our first regional plan. And as you'll hear, this is the culmination of a huge amount of work involving a myriad of contributors. But before we get to that, the main item, first some housekeeping matters. All microphones and cameras have been set to off to help with the bandwidth. If you're wanting to ask a technical question or post a general comment, can you please use the chat function? The Teams question and answer function, which you'll see up on the top bar, toolbar of Teams, is the means by which you can ask questions. So if you want to ask a question, please post it in the Q&A function. If for whatever reason, and sometimes people can't access the Q&A function, then if you put it into the chat, somebody from the WRE team will then cut and paste it across into the Q&A. A recording of the event and the slides will be available on the Water Resources East website in the near future as well. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Daniel Johns, the WRE's Managing Director. Daniel.
Thank you very much, Paul, and good afternoon. So what we're going to do this afternoon is the WRE team will step through the kind of key aspects of the Water Resources Plan for Eastern England that we published yesterday on our website. But also, given it is a multi-sector plan and given the direction that WRE was going to help all sectors to plan for their water resources needs on a long-term basis, as we did last year, we've invited representatives and board members from across the different sectors that we have worked so closely with in preparing our draft regional plan. So Lindsay Hargreaves from the NFU, Giles Bloomfield from the Internal Drainage Boards, representing Water Management Alliance, Stella Lyons from Energy UK, Matt Wells from the Canal and Rivers Trust, and bringing an environmental voice to the table, Barry Bendall from the Rivers Trust. But I'm really keen to leave as much time as possible for questions, and please do use the Q&A function throughout our presentations to ask any questions that you would like to, and both the WRE team and our speakers will be pitching in and helping to answer those questions as we go. We'll also try and leave enough time to talk about next steps for WRE, as today does mark essentially the end of the first round of regional planning from WRE's perspective, but we know that there's a second round starting straight away, and we're really keen to get moving with that as soon as possible. So in terms of the Regional Water Resources Plan for Eastern England, I'm going to give the high-level messages, what's moved on since the draft plan and what the implications are for the kind of plan's headlines, and then bring in Alice Rigg and Catherine Smart to present the details. You might have noticed that Ben Fitzsimons isn't presenting today, although he is actually on the call, and that's because, well, the happy news is Ben and his partner gave birth to identical twin girls not so long ago, and he's got more than enough on his plate right now, but we're delighted to have Ben with us today, and I'm sure he's keen to get back into the team after Christmas to help us take things forward. Just a quick reminder about Water Resources East. I'm sure everyone knows by now that WRE is one of the 5 regional planning groups under the National Framework for Water Resources, tasked by government to create a long-term water resources plan for their region. We're set up as an independent not-for-profit company, and the organisations on your screen form our board of directors. And just to note that since the last year, we've had Catherine McKenzie from the Revival Association join us as our second stakeholder director, and Catherine's on the call today, and also Paul Mumford representing Urban and Civic. So we've now got kind of housing developers and the property industry also represented on our board, alongside councils, environmental interests, local councils, internal drainage boards, and the water companies. We also, of course, many people on this call are members of WRE under our Article Association, and between them being integrally involved in the production of our plan as part of the consultation process, as part of the workshops that have been running over past years, and we're really proud of our wide membership and how important they are to us in shaping our plans and proposals and making sure we're heading in the right direction as an organisation. So to the headlines, this is our final regional plan, updated, improved since the consultation on the draft plan this time last year. And many of the headlines are the same, but reinforced in our regional plan that we published just yesterday. We've got a slightly larger deficit projected by 2050 of 800 million litres of water per day, and we'll explain why that number has changed and gone up somewhat. And we know that because of water scarcity challenges, not just in the long term, but in the shorter term too, there are already constraints emerging for agriculture, for housing and for economic growth because of a lack of water within the environment. What our regional plan does is it projects and identifies the best value approach to meeting those projected deficits, focusing on the public water supply, but in choosing options and solutions which benefit all sectors and maximises those co-benefits in order to meet growth projections through demand management and leakage control primarily, to achieve increased and improved drought resilience by 2040, as the government expects, and also to deliver the highest environmental ambition. So as we did last year, our core proposals are based on the business as usual plus scenario, our resilience scenario, but the WRE's board and our plan overall still has that enhanced outcomes in line, and that remains our ambition for 2050. The best value plan, as presented on this screen, is slightly different, but the core of the proposals are the same. It transfers and demand management in the short term to use to kind of offset the impacts of growth and to move water to where it's needed. But since last year, we've had Ofwat's accelerated infrastructure delivery scheme. So this is additional funding allowed early within company business plans to bring schemes forward. We've got a new interregional transfer option supported by Water Resources West and Water Resources Southeast, allowing Affinity to back off its demands from Grafton Water so that Anglian Water can supply Cambridge Water instead. And because of the increased ambition on leakage and demand management, there's less reliance in our final plan on desalination and water reuse in our core pathway through to 2050. Our plan also shows how we have prioritised particular habitats and water bodies for environmental improvements. And our costs have gone up, but that's partly because we've included demand management measures for the first time. So they weren't included this time last year. And we've also updated our supply side figures. And when you get to the kind of latter stages of our plan, you'll see that we've done much more to define what our adaptive pathways are through to 2050, depending on what scenarios unfold, depending on how assumptions and projections change. We show how our plan is kind of resilient to future uncertainty, and that the options within our plan, represent that kind of low regret best value pathway forward. This chart, as we had last year, shows essentially the overall picture. Demand for the public water supply going up, but in this case, because of increased ambition on leakage control and the impact of government policies, demand management leakage control more than offset the impacts of growth. But at the same time, we need to take far less water from the environment in order to help nature recover. And that comes through in three main phases. By the end of the 2020s, to avoid water bodies deteriorating, to protect habitats. In the mid-2030s, as the major supply side schemes come online, particularly the kind of the Fens Reservoir water reuse schemes, allows abstraction caps to be reduced to start to deliver those long-term environmental improvements, and then a big step down in water available for use in 2040, whilst we also deliver drought resilience, that drought resilience standard by 2040. So essentially, the plan is pretty much delivered by the time we get to 2040. And the overall balance between supply and demand side has shifted more on the demand management side, and therefore less capacity needed on the supply side. Overall, as I mentioned, leakage control is up from 29% in our draft plan to 39%, although that does come at a cost, which we'll talk about later. Growth in non-household consumption is limited to 3%. Now, the government's target for 2038 assumes nationally that we can achieve a 9% reduction in non-household consumption. And for a region like the East that is fast growing, we've got huge amounts of new requests for non-household consumption supplies for data centres, for life sciences. We don't think it's realistic within the East of England to choke off that growth in order to achieve a 9% reduction target. But because of demand management options, we are limiting the growth in non-household to 3%. But because of the growing population, another 1.4 million people expected in the East by 2050, 2050, the water use per capita, that distribution input per capita target, which is the core national water saving target, that still comes down by almost the 20% that the government has signed itself up to. There is a significant reliance on water efficiency policy baked into our plans through water labelling. But as I say, because of more demand management, we can include less reuse, less desal in our draft plan, with more transfers and smaller options picking up some of the slack. As I step through the kind of core plan from in several time slices by the late 2020s, early 2030s, we're starting to see reuse and water treatment works upgrades, transfers and smaller schemes appearing on the map. By the time we get to the 2030s, we're starting to see that first of the major reservoirs outside Chatteris in the Cambridgeshire Fens come into supply, as well as that Cambridge interim transfer from Anglian Water, plus more reuse schemes along the coastline. By the time we get to 2040, say most of the plan now is in place. So we've got the Lincolnshire Reservoir, a really significant new source of supply, hopefully in place by the end of the 2030s, and 3 desal plants along the kind of Norfolk, Suffolk, and Norfolk, Essex, and Lincolnshire coastlines. There were 4 desal plants in our core plan. Because of more leakage control and demand management, we think we can reduce that to 3 within our core pathway. So overall, the core pathway to 2050 looks like this on a page. Demand going up, water available for supply going down. A series of steps toward 2050, starting with more work to understand exactly what the environment needs where in order to recover. Those multi-sector investigations we want to commission essentially starting now and in January to get them underway. We want to prioritise chalk rivers, wetlands and sensitive water dependent habitats for early improvement. And the Environment Agency will be working with them to monitor progress with our water company members on a multi-sector basis so that we can trigger adaptive action as and when necessary. So that's the overall message. I was going to hand now to Alice to take us through what this means in terms of environmental improvements and those supply side options.
Thank you, Daniel. Hello, everyone. I'm Alice Rigg and I'm the technical analyst here at WRE. So just to follow on from that point Daniel made there, these maps are highlighting the areas that we're prioritising the environmental destination and licence caps. So the map on the left there is the licence reductions that are being brought in first in the darker green, and the map on the right is the environmental destination reductions for the BAU plus pathway. And you can see over the top of that are the blue and the orange areas are where the chalk rivers and the European protected areas are, the SPAs and the SACs. And you can see that we're really highlighting our licence reductions in those areas and returning water to these important environments. In the future, in the next year, as Daniel mentioned, we'll be prioritising these areas more for our environmental destination investigations and hopefully bringing in a local picture. So to meet these deficits, we took a review of our feasible options list. And to start with, we integrated some new options that have been developed through the water company's WRMP process. And these are mostly smaller options, all under 30 megalitres per day, but they're strategically placed to meet those areas of deficit. We also looked through our rejection register and screened out some more options on environmental grounds. And this is notably all of the brackish desalination plants. We've also introduced that time-limited Grand Union Canal time-limited transfer, which Daniel mentioned earlier as well, which is critical for Cambridge water before the Fens come online. So for this reason, it forms part of our core pathway. And similarly, we've included the accelerated infrastructure delivery schemes, as these represent our low regret options for the 2030s. We've also added in a couple more options to our modelling for the different sizes for the Fens and Lincolnshire reservoirs to provide some evidence for these sizes for the Rapid Gate 2 action reports. Sorry, I got distracted there. The deficit is being met by these options completely. The overall capacity for these options, if we take out all of the dependencies, all of the size variants, it more than meets that deficit 3 times over. And this is because the deficit is being picked up by the the demand side options, as Kate will pass on to you next. But an important note to make before we get there is that we are working with the EA on plans to support the development of supply options for the non-public water supply sectors, and these will be brought in for the next round of regional planning. So thank you, and here's Kate.
Thanks, Alice. Hi everyone, Kate Smart, Principal Water Resources Specialist here, and as Alice says, to complement our supply side options, we've got another parallel process regarding demand management. This seeks to offset growth, focusing on population and non-household growth in consumption. Through our demand management strategy, we're looking to save over 330 megalitres a day of water, though that obviously does have a significant cost. We're looking at approximately sort of £5.5 billion by 2020. A significant proportion of that is due to changes in the Anglian water leakage strategy. They're seeing an increase in their work to reduce leakage, but that has a significant associated cost with it. This work is all leading, Daniel mentioned, all leading to a reduction in per capita consumption across the region by 19% by 2038, which is very closely aligned with national targets and really moving forward in our consumption reduction. So in order to understand the implications of the demand management and the impacts of growth in demand on our regional plan, we ran a suite of different demand forecasts through our regional models, and these are very closely aligned with the water company WRE processes as well. Updates to the forecasts include making sure that they reflect current population and property forecasts as best as we currently know, changes to sort of base year numbers and COVID-19 impacts, important to ensure that they now reflect current working practices and consumption practices. Government-led interventions is one that is important to highlight. This is now removed from our baseline and it's captured as a demand option, and it's as you can see in the pie chart on the side of the screen, there's a very significant contribution associated with these government-led interventions, up to sort of 35% of our demand management strategy. So this is something that we're using the plan to really encourage and work with government and encourage them to ensure that these interventions really do deliver the savings that we might be able to see. We've also increased demand management option benefits and the way forecasting of non-household growth. And as Daniel mentioned earlier, there's a significant challenge that the region faces. Obviously, though, there is a lot of uncertainty associated with all of these demand management options. There's a lot of unknowns in the future about how population will grow, how non-household will grow, and how behaviour may change as well. So to ensure that we're understanding that as best we can, we'll be working closely with the water companies to monitor progress, and this will be reported annually. And moving on now to talk a bit about our adaptive pathways. So as mentioned earlier, we have a preferred plan, a core plan, which represents BAU+, and this can be seen with the bright blue line on the chart. We then also have a number of other pathways, which we use to assess different potential outcomes for the plan and what that might need in terms of supply options. This chart is just looking at supply options. So we've got, if we went back to a BAU style of environmental destination, that's obviously much less ambitious. If we moved towards the full enhanced scenario, that's significantly more ambitious, and you can see how much more additional water we might need to meet that. And then we also have one in the yellow, which is a high consumption pathway, whereby if the demand management options that I just talked through don't deliver the sort of benefits that we'd expect, and therefore associated with a higher consumption scenario, what that might mean in terms of supply side options. I should also just point out here that associated with these pathways is a number of different decision and branch points, and the decision points need to come quite early, particularly in relation to the type of environmental destination scenario that might be needed. And this is in order to ensure that we have time to develop the options that we needed for increased supply. So we'll be using our AMP8 environmental destination investigations to inform that understanding, to understand at what point we may need to trigger additional options if necessary. And the same with the high consumption pathway. We'll be tracking the demand management options, and that decision point comes quite early in the planning period in order to enable options to be put in place. So on my next slide, I'm just going to those sort of option splits and in a little bit more detail. So this again is just for the supply side options, and you see that across all 4 of our pathways, the reservoir options remain. They're core options for our plan. We think they're very important and they offer a lot of benefits, and they stay the same size throughout all of the pathways. The variation particularly sits with the desalination schemes. They're the most scalable and they offer a bit more opportunity, particularly later in the planning period, to enable us to meet, for example, enhanced environmental destination and the greater deficits that are associated with that. We have, if you sort of drop back down to the BAU pathway, there's slightly less schemes required, and the high consumption sort of sits somewhere in the middle. And then just to summarise in terms of costs, obviously increased supply side options are associated with more costs, and this can be seen from the chart. So if you look at the dark blue line, that's obviously the highest cost, and that's associated with the enhanced environmental destination pathway. However, that obviously comes with a lot of other benefits as well, and we've considered our pathways through a best value point of view, ensuring that we're looking at not just the cost, but the other benefits that can come from delivering different schemes. And then the least cost in the sort of bright blue colour is there for a comparison. So that one is just looking at costs, and if we didn't consider the other benefits that schemes might offer, you know, that's the one that would offer the cheapest plan, but not necessarily meet other things that we want to achieve. And you can see that actually there's not that much difference between the least cost plan and some of the other best value adapted pathways until it starts to diverge with that environmental destination comes in a bit later in the plan. So that's kind of summarising all of our plan and the work in a very quick way. There's obviously lots more detail behind the scenes, but hopefully that gives you a flavour of the things that we've been working through. By adopting a best value approach, we hope to have pulled in a lot of different metrics and things that are important across our multi-sector stakeholders. And whilst our demand and supply options do align very closely with our water company colleagues, we also have considered the multi-sector needs as much as possible. We've now got a number of presentations from our multi-sector colleagues, and they're just been talking a bit more about some of the challenges and the next steps that they're expecting to see. We look forward to working very closely with them in their ways to develop their future water resources planning. So without any more from me, I will pass over to Lindsay.
Thank you very much, Kate. I'm Lindsay Hargreaves. I'm going to spend a couple of minutes talking about the matters from an agricultural point of view, a little bit about agriculture itself, how it fits into the region, what this process has meant for agriculture, and where we might like to see it go next. I guess the first point to make is that 75% of the region's land area is farmed, and the region's farmers hold 60% of England's irrigation abstraction licenses. So water and farming quite important in this area. One of its features is it's a very fragmented sector with many individual operators, thousands of them. But a combination of the topography and the soil types of this region has led to the development of an agriculture that is an agricultural economy which is based on high value water sensitive crops, mostly for UK markets. That's vegetables, salads, and fruit. And in parallel with that primary productive activity, farming and landowning also hosts and delivers a wide variety of the ecosystem services that we need in order to deliver our environmental destination and ambition. But this whole activity underpins significant parts of the regional economy, so water for food and the food sector, agriculture, is pretty important when it comes to food security for not just for the region but for the nation, our food production effort, employment, economic growth, and the ecosystem activities too. And of course, like everyone else, we face enormous pressures from abstraction reform and climate change. So looking at the what the process has done, as we've gone through quite a number of years now, but more intensively in the last 3 or 4 years, you know, what has emerged from this from agriculture's point of view, and at quite an early stage, we worked out that agriculture was not structured, not equipped to take an effective part in the planning process. Even basic questions we couldn't answer. You know, when what is the future requirement of water for agriculture? We didn't know. That's not to say that the sector is chaotic. Far from it. It's just not structured to do this. Although there is some collaborative activity, there are some a number of water abstractor groups set up and operating, and some of them for many years. But they're geographically scattered and not fully resourced to deliver the kind of work that's needed. And this is the sort of the demand and supply deficit work, the forecasting work, the very sophisticated modelling that really needs to be done these days to work out what where we go from here. And the process itself, the regional process, it has illustrated that because it has no funding, structured funding to cover any technical work for anything outside of public water supply, that's hampered the process for agriculture. So that's something that's been highlighted of great importance. But I guess one of the things that has done is stimulated the self-help aspect of it, and one thing that has already been pointed out is this matter that sectors really should be taking ownership, and we want to take ownership of our own water resource management plans, and the development of the Water for Food group, which is being developed to address this very need, but it too needs support to do that. And one of the things that group is aiming to do is to define a direct line of sight from the individual agricultural abstractor all the way through the regional process, through national, up to ministerial level, so that we can be properly organised and take an appropriate part in what is happening. But another aspect that has emerged for agriculture, not necessarily through this process, it's a matter of fact, is that the impacts, abstraction impacts are happening now. So we do have the license capping process under the Water Framework Directive, no deterioration rules, and also environmental restrictions through the Restoring Sustainable Abstraction process. And this all builds up to a lot of uncertainty and risk amongst the farming sector in terms of how much water we might or might not have in the future, and when. And I guess it raises the issue of understanding the issues and alternatives. You know, if we know what's going to happen, if we understand why it should happen, then we can better equipped to respond and do something. But one aspect of the regulatory process, which has emerged through this, is time to adapt. And it's quite difficult for farming. I mean, the Environment Agency does do its best to give farming time to adapt, but the regulatory process makes that quite difficult, and so sometimes it does place very, very high pressure on that. So I guess to summarize some of those sort of things in terms of where we've got to with the plan and the opportunity that it affords. I mean, the regional plan does, I think, very, very plainly and in some detail acknowledge the importance of agriculture and the pressures that it faces. This matter of a water resources management plan for agriculture, something that parallels the process that is already in place for public water supply, and I guess other sectors will need a similar kind of thing. But I'm here to speak for agriculture. That need is highly apparent, and setting up the organisation and the right governance and funding to do that is something that really does need urgent attention, and that's reflected in the plan and in WRE's management plan for the coming years. The fragmented nature of farming and some of the practical natures of farming and access to water does point to local solutions for local problems, or a much more catchment-based approach. And again, that has emerged very strongly through the process to the point where we are now. So, one is optimistic that we are now putting effort into that and building up that catchment-based approach and how to work multi-sectorally and cross-sectorally. And so with the right kind of effort and support, we should have a regional structure that can deliver the synergies in organising the technical work and identifying the options. And I mentioned here cross-sector opportunities and multi-sector working. The cross-sector and multi-sector are slightly different, and I think there are great opportunities in a synergistic way when we can help each other sort out our collective problems. And perhaps in summary, I would say that I mean, it sounds rather a quaint statement, a fair share of water for farming and food, but water is very important for this region, and it does deserve proper consideration when you consider everything that it has to offer. And it would be good to see through the next phases of the process a mechanism which does level up a little bit the way that water for farming and food is considered against water for other issues. And I think we are on the way to a much more open and transparent process to identify the problems and seek the solutions. And we're equally on the way to having an effective water resources planning process for agriculture, but it needs work and it needs effort. And I am confident that agriculture not only wants to do that to organise itself and take part, but it will do. But I will underline this very matter at the bottom is time to adapt. If we reach a point where we accept the need for change, we can see that change is necessary, it is, I think, reasonable to say that we need time to adapt. But having said all of that, I think there's a lot of work gone into this report. I think it has a lot of promise, and the agricultural sector looks forward to working with the region and also at national level to develop this very important process. Thanks very much for that. I'm going to hand over to Jenna. No, I'm not. Giles, I do beg your pardon.
Thanks very much, Lindsay. Yes, so I'm Giles Bloomfield. I work for the Water Management Alliance, and I'm also representing ADA on the board. So I'm going to give you a whistle-stop tour of how this works from an internal drainage board perspective. So internal drainage boards, for those that don't know, are small public bodies. Our reporting body is DEFRA. We originally set up in recognition for areas of special drainage need, and this is defined in the Land Drainage Act. We're key water level managers, and you can see from the map here that you've got substantial areas of the UK, so about 10% of the land mass, and we operate the areas of low-lying land just above and heading below sea level. We're on the front line of climate change, of course, from sea level rise, but also from the particular changes in intense rainfall over the winter period and then extreme periods of drought thereafter. We're custodians of environmental best practice with the works that we do, and our officers manage everything from the intensive farmland right the way through to some of the most important internationally designated landscapes of international repute. We have a number of resilient and adaptive infrastructure, including waterways, pumping stations, and water control structures. You can see from this image, this is the largest pumping station in the UK. This is St Germans. To give you an idea of scale, this can pump up to 100 cubic meters or 100 tons of water every second to move water forward out of harm's way. It's a significant resource. Water transfers as part of this water resources programme is going to be incredibly important for us as we move forward to continue our legal duties under water level management plans. Water level management plans are used to set water levels to protect those legally designated habitats that you saw scattered across the Anglian region and beyond, to ensure that those water levels maintain the designated interest features. with prolonged droughts and such like we are seeing and multi-year droughts, we are finding it very difficult to maintain those flows and obviously levels to support those habitats. And equally, we have other new initiatives, the Lowland Peat Task Force and the report to sequester carbon by wetting up the soils to prevent them escaping carbon dioxide and worse, methane. We do have legislative barriers to be considered as part of the water level programme, is that we are set up under statute to drain as a drainage authority. We can't take on board and invest in assets which have other functions, so water resource management and attenuation, building reservoirs. It would require a change in legislation. We also have things which are slightly perverse, like taking water from a river and transferring it through to somewhere else would require a water abstraction license, which we would be charged for, although we actually don't consume the product itself. There are other issues with current government policy for things like river maintenance and conveyance. There is an investment bias towards capital investment, and revenue spending therefore is often less, and we don't have the right resources in the right place to ensure optimizing the systems to work for both, productivity and also the environment. Many assets that we have are at or be on the end of their design lives. A lot of the investment came into the area post 1953 storm surge. So 70 years later, they are showing signs of the end of their life and needing investment. A lot of the investment, because of the legal obligations to the environment, is actually funded on least cost option to sustain. So this is rather than best value for taking account all the additional benefits that may be derived. Key opportunities of moving forward with regard to sort of water transfers and having a more integrated system. The Environment Agency is looking at the demaining programme with internal drainage boards and others. The idea is looking at transferring the management of those assets which are best placed, working to the strength of all of the organisations involved to ensure that things are operating as best they can for us all. There's a good example of a internal drainage board waterway in this image where you've got multiple drains coming into a single drain, and we can transfer over very long distances of flat land large volumes of water to the benefit of all. We have clear linkages with lots of other strategies that are going on. I'll name a few in the form of sort of the FENS 100, which is looking at obviously preserving the breadbasket of the UK, but also obviously the soil structure, which is a large proportion of the peat. Obviously, the Lowland Peat Task Force report has got a number of key recommendations, of which the government have taken those recommendations in full. There's lots of research and R&D being undertaken, paludiculture farming or wetland farming. I'm aware that there are lots of activity going on in the Fenland areas and also closer to home in Broadland, where we are looking at alternative ways of farming and driving through high yielding products. So from the fibres from the different wetland crops. Local nature recovery networks and strategies, biodiversity net gain, nutrient neutrality, working with nature-based solutions. ELMS, the Environmental Land Management Scheme, will also be important to ensure sustainable solutions to enable this continued economic and environmental prosperity. And I'll wrap up, but the IDBs are obviously very keen to play their part in this integrated and collaborative multifunctional partnership as we move forward. I'll leave it there, and thank you very much for your time, and I'm passing on to Jenna.
So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jenna Lyons, and I'm speaking on behalf of Energy UK today, which is the trade association for the energy industry, and specifically I'm talking about the power generation sector. So the WRE regional plan recognises that the energy transition to net zero will result in higher freshwater demands than in recent years from the power and hydrogen sectors at some locations. The power sector provided WRE with a range of water use projections in the region by future hydrogen and power generation under different scenarios. Now, we didn't provide an update to the projections between the draft and the final plan because there was no further clarity or reduction in uncertainty. And you can find these projections in JEP reports on the Energy UK website. The JEP is a group of generating companies that fund common work on non-competitive environmental issues. The JEP provides technical input into Energy UK, and sometimes we represent Energy UK at meetings like I'm doing today. From the JEP point of view, existing sites are very suitable for new low carbon energy projects, as they have the land, they've got a connection to the national grid to get power in and out, they've got transport links, plus there's water abstraction and discharge infrastructure already there. So JEP companies are looking to reuse existing power sector abstraction licenses as old plants cease to generate and sites are redeveloped for large-scale low-carbon power and hydrogen generation. Where a site has closed and the owner has no development plans, the power sector will most likely revoke the licence or trade it with a third party. So what has the JEP and Energy UK done since the draft plan? So we've provided a table of updated power abstraction licenses in the region to WRE. We've provided a table of the number of potential energy project sites in each WRE water resource zone. So this was based on the digest of UK Energy Statistics list of existing sites and a list of projects from Hydrogen UK, plus any additions that the JEP could provide. The EA and Energy UK held a workshop on the 18th of July in London on barriers to access to water for the energy sector. So many of the right people were at the workshop to articulate the problems, but an observation was that these people generally don't have the power to make policy changes. Energy UK has engaged with the refresh of the National Framework for Water Resources projects on water resources governance, on a review of funding options for multi-sector water resource planning, and on the EA Water Energy Framework project. So my final slide is on key messages and next steps. So both the power and water sectors are looking to minimise uncertainty, but there are many challenges. Energy companies want regulatory certainty. Operational power plant require continued access to fresh water and water rights to provide electricity system security. Future power and hydrogen production plant require access to fresh water and water rights for the project lifetime to secure investment, to contribute to electricity system security and to ensure decarbonisation in a resilient and affordable way. Now, we understand that WRE would like locational water demand certainty within the region for future power and hydrogen projects, but there are a number of reasons why neither the JEP nor Energy UK can provide this. The JEP's working on a slide set on the difficulties surrounding site-specific information. For example, there's no centralised planning of dispatchable generation. It's a competitive market and we have to obey competition law. Projects that are in the public domain, even those with planning consent and environmental permit, may not achieve a successful financial investment decision. Circumstances change and different companies have different attitudes to risk, so it's just a warning that a known project development does not always result in a future operating plant. We believe that net zero needs to be a key consideration within the remit of the regulators, with some priority for water for low carbon energy projects. We somehow need to engage DEFRA more in relation to the power sector so they understand our issues and can begin to help with policy solutions. If the government wants net zero to happen, the government will have to ensure that water is available for low carbon energy projects. And finally, continued communication is essential because that's how we gain a better understanding of each other's problems and hopefully work towards solutions. So that's it for me. I'm handing over to Matt now.
Okay. Hi there. Good afternoon. Is my camera not working for some reason? No, I'll just okay. Hello, good afternoon. I'm Matt Wells and I'm Principal Hydrologist at the Canal and River Trust. So the Canal and River Trust are the custodians of 2,000 miles of canals and navigable rivers across England and Wales. The original purpose of the canal system was to link river catchments to be able to transport goods before we had reliable roads or a railway network. Therefore, our navigation network has a rich history dating back more than 200 years when it helped to facilitate the start of the Industrial Revolution. Today, the network is still used by boaters, mainly for leisure purposes, but also many other users, walkers, anglers, cyclists, to name a few. The canal network is an established blue-green corridor rich in wildlife. Importantly for this forum, the expanse of the network crossing catchments provides connectivity and the possibility of innovative solutions to meet water demands and challenges. As such, the Trust has representation in all 5 regional water resources groups. For an example of how the canal system can be used to meet water resources challenges, I'll summarise the Grand Union Canal GUC strategic resource option. We've been working with Severn Trent Water and Affinity Water regarding a new water resources transfer of up to 115 megalitres per day, sourced from Minworth Treatment Works in Birmingham, sending the water to Affinity Water in Hertfordshire. The water would travel via the Coventry and Ashby Canal, the North Oxford Canal, and then the main part of the route is along the Grand Union Canal, where it's abstracted at the endpoint for treatment and public water supply. Elsewhere in the canal network, we also provide water to United Utilities via the Llangollen Canal, Bristol Water via the Gloucester Sharpness Canal, and Wessex Water via the Bridgewater and Taunton Canal. Across our network, we have industrial and agricultural customers abstracting water from the canal to help meet their demands. The purpose of this explanation is to consider what is possible using the connectivity of the existing canal system. It may be possible to source surplus water from within our canal system, or, as with the GUC scheme, source water from elsewhere and use the canal as a conduit for transfer. My last slide covers reflections on how we've worked with WRE and our hopes for the future. It's my perception that the Trust were perhaps a little bit late and slow getting fully immersed into the discussions with WRE. This isn't a criticism of WRE. In our water management team, we're quite limited resources, and for a period of time, we were concentrating on getting the GUC scheme started. However, we now appreciate having a seat at the WRE table. Historically, water resources planning has been dominated by water companies. We're now moving in the right direction, with non-public water supply represented in WRE, as we've already heard, and we'd like to see more of this and more emphasis on multi-sector, non-public water supply in water resources strategic planning in the future. We know within the Canal and River Trust that we need to progress our strategic water resources investigations. We'll be issuing our updated water resources strategy next year, whilst continuing to develop our water resources modelling. We need a better understanding of water movement through the connected network, i.e. imports and exports in catchments and out of catchments. In doing so, we'll be able to better understand catchment and regional water balances and potentially identify new schemes. Looking ahead, we're looking forward to continuing to work positively with WRE and all the other water resources groups. So thank you for your time. I'm going to hand over now to Barry from the Rivers Trust.
Thank you, Matt, and hello everyone. My name's Barry Bendel. I work at the Rivers Trust and have been involved in WRE since its inception. I plan to use most of my 5 minutes of this allotted time to quickly run through this graph showing the planned pathway for achieving environmental destination and to highlight what I think are some of the key considerations from an environmental perspective. All the animations seem to have come at once, so never mind that. So I'll go through them one by one. So firstly, with regard to environmental destination target itself, it is undoubtedly a good thing that we are planning to meet the needs of the environment over a long-term horizon. And it's encouraging that WRE is aiming to achieve the enhanced environmental destination. However, we are talking about, in reality, we're talking about a modelled number. And we need to avoid the assumption that simply having and hopefully achieving this target will deliver the desired outcomes for the region's environment. As with all models, there is much uncertainty around the data and the outcomes for the environment at the local level, for example, in meeting site-based needs or supporting sufficient flow in the headwaters of chalk stream catchments, for example, are far from clear. Early licence reductions in the plan are mainly there to prevent further deterioration of an already heavily impacted environment, and the majority of environmental gains are not delivered until much later on in the planning period, as we've already heard. And the detail of these environmental gains will be dependent on water company investigations in forthcoming AMP periods. And even if we are to assume that the water companies will have very high ambition to maximise environmental outcomes, these proposals will be subject to cost-benefit analysis by the regulators, and we will need to make sure that full consideration of the environment's needs are taken into account in our interactions at catchment, regional and national scales. And this will be particularly important or critical, in fact, when it comes down to deciding between the pathways for a BAU plus or enhanced destination. As we've heard, much of the plan, and that is to leave as much water in the environment as possible, is dependent on new supply options coming online. However, there is an interesting question around public acceptability for supply options. And any delays or failures to bring these new schemes online within the current planning timeframes are likely to have further compromising effects on the delivery of the environmental outcomes. Furthermore, where these schemes do go ahead, there is also the challenge of making sure they deliver as much environmental and biodiversity gain as possible. Again, all of this will be subject to cost-benefit spreadsheets and funding constraints, and so collaboration and partnership working to maximise the environmental outcomes will be critical. Finally, a large assumption in the plan is the ability to achieve very ambitious demand and leakage reduction targets, as we've heard. Whilst it is really good to hear and see about so much ambition, failure to meet these targets is, in my view, a major risk, and the most likely outcome of failing to meet these targets will be further compromise to the environment. So this is my last slide. As you would have picked up from the previous slide, there are many reasons, from my perspective at least, to remain cautious about the environmental outcomes at this stage in the planning process. However, I wanted to end with a bit more optimism, and this slide and the points contained within it are the ones that I highlighted at the launch of the draft plan 1 year ago on some of the areas I think we needed to improve and sort of next steps from the draft plan. I'm not going to go through them one by one here and now, but I did want to reflect on the significant amount of progress that has been made in quite a short space of time with all of those points highlighted. So there will no doubt be many challenges ahead as we try to tackle the environmental water problems of too much, too little and too dirty. However, it does feel to me that with the publication of the final plan, the forthcoming WRE business plan, the current level of multi-sector support and governmental support, particularly encouragingly for the integration of water resources regional planning with catchment-based approach, that we are at least headed in the right direction. That's all I wanted to say, and over to you, Daniel.
Brilliant, Barry, thank you so much, and thank you to all our speakers. Okay, so just to wrap up this section before we turn to the Q&A, I just wanted to partly to pick up the recommendations that we made in our draft regional plan last year, and to talk about the progress that we have made with our partners since, and also, as Barry said, to formally kind of launch the business plan, which actually we did at our annual general meeting just before this call this afternoon. But the first 5 bullets on your screen right now are the recommendations that we made this time last year, and we're really pleased with the progress that we've made, including through working really closely with government colleagues, with our regulators. So and they confirmed, really importantly, confirmed in January that there would be a second round of regional planning. Stepping back 12 months ago, that was still in doubt. I mean, obviously there were really kind of warm signals coming from government at that stage, but it was really, really useful and really important for them to confirm that there would be a second round in January, so that we could maintain momentum, grow the team and get ourselves ready for this next round. We also are having really interesting and kind of hopefully very positive conversations with the other regional groups and with the Environment Agency through the agricultural representatives, through people like Lindsay, Steve Moncaster, in other sectors as well, about making sure that all regional groups across England and parts of Wales are properly funded on a multi-sector basis, so that we can develop genuinely fully multi-sector plans when we get into the second round. As it stands, our core programme is still funded by the water companies. We've not been able to spend as much money as we would like to have done over the last 12 months to update our multi-sector work. But we also know that there is a lot of work happening in the background, separate lines of funding going into the agricultural sector, for example, to update projections of future water use, to develop templates for both agricultural water resource management plans and for drought management plans as well. And there should be announcements very soon in the context of the Cambridge Delivery Group process about how more water storage for agriculture can be brought forward as local resource options to help reduce the pressure on the environment, to reduce groundwater abstraction, and also kind of catchment scale assessments of both the long-term demand for water for irrigation within particular sectors, again piloted within Cambridge, and where those options and solutions might come from. We've also seen progress this year on the timetable for demand management options coming from government. We had the Environmental Improvement Plan in January, followed by DEFRA's new plan for water, and it included a roadmap towards more water efficient new developments, with the core of those proposals focusing on the water labelling for taps and showers, toilets, appliances, dishwashers and washing machines, confirming that that measure will be brought in from 2025, and that's the single most impactful policy measure we think that government can introduce. So it's really important that that happens. But we also do need to see changes in building regulations to tighten water standards in new development. We need to make sure that communal supplies of rainwater and grey water, recycled water, can be put back into households through a dual pipe system, because at the moment drinking water regulations prevent the communal supply of non-wholesome water. We also still want to see more certainty for abstractors over the impacts of forthcoming licence reforms, but still the Environment Agency has got that message and is going to be kicking off a series of kind of catchment reviews to provide as much certainty as they can on that front. And as we've already mentioned, Alice mentioned this earlier, we're really keen to establish a single integrated approach to planning for environmental improvement for all sectors. So these are the environmental destination investigations that we've mentioned a couple of times. We've put forward a request for funding to DEFRA and the Environment Agency, so we can kick those off from January on a properly multi-sector basis. And there's also now a study which is looking at the kind of long-term funding needs for the regional groups, and hopefully a mechanism will be found to kind of secure that funding on a long-term and sustainable basis. But I think probably what you've heard through today's webinar, that alongside the kind of priority amongst for agricultural users to increase and improve capacity and planning for water resources within the agricultural sector, we've also got a real challenge on the non-household side. Massive growth in non-household consumption, basically since Brexit, with a lot of onshoring of previously offshore manufacturing facilities looking for water, green hydrogen production, and also post-COVID impacts on increases in leisure use. More home working means that it's a challenging situation in order to be kind of focusing on non-household growth. So there's also a recommendation within our report this time to say that we need to work much more closely with planning authorities, with government, with regulators and with the water companies to make sure that those long-term needs for non-household growth are properly satisfied through water resource management planning and the regional planning process, because otherwise we're just going to be choking off that growth by not being kind of ahead of the curve and investing in the right supply schemes at the right time. But going on to the business plan, again, we're delighted to say that we have now launched our new business plan for the next 5 years to take us through the entirety of the next 5-year planning round. We've discussed this amongst our membership, the strategic advisory group. So being a member of WRE means you get the inside track on what our business plan will be and can help shape those priorities. You'll find the business plan published on our website online. And just briefly, what it does is it sets, obviously retains the existing vision subject to the new National Framework for Water Resources, which we expect to come out in draft in the next 12 months. We still feel that that is fit for purpose as an overriding mission and vision for us as a company. It sets and refreshes the 5 strategic priorities, which you can see on your screen. And underneath each of those strategic priorities, there's a set of early actions and longer term actions and also success measures so that we can track progress and report at our AGM each year on whether or not we're moving in the right direction. You'll see from the strategic priorities, there's a real emphasis on multi-sector water resources planning that we've been talking about today, but also really branching out now into integrated water management, using nature-based approaches and kind of catchment scale planning to improve the environment from a water and land management perspective. We also want to increase and improve our governance in light of a review that the Environment Agency has kicked off for all the regional groups to make sure that the governance of water resources planning from a national to regional to local scale is as good as it can be, improve our transparency and improve our diversity. Of course, funding is still a question, as I've mentioned, lots of progress, really positive discussions with government, and hopefully once we've got that funding in place, we can really move forward with our business plan priorities. So that is it from me as well. Hopefully you've had really good overview of the regional plan. We've brought in the multi-sector perspectives and viewpoints, and we have plenty of time now for questions and answers. So perhaps, Paul, can I hand back to you?
Yes, please do. And thank you very much. And thanks to all of the presenters for keeping to time, but also covering comprehensively the wide range. And you'll see the multi-sector approach that's certainly embedded within the plan and the considerations, not just of public water supply, but also of the environment, energy, agriculture, the IDBs, canals and river trust, which I think is really important. So there are a range of questions. Unfortunately, the Q&A function hasn't necessarily worked for everyone. I'm included within the everyone. So I will be doing my best to make sure that we address all of these questions. So the first question is, and anybody on the panel, any of the speakers have still got speaking rights and can speak. So anybody who feels that the question is for them or that they would like to add an answer, then please do. So one of the first question is, are there energy issues with the plan, the water energy nexus? And I'm assuming that this goes beyond the energy, the water for energy production that we already talked about. I think this is energy required within the water supply system.
Can I, Paul, take that question to start off with?
So, yeah.
Yeah, so first of all, we have assessed the energy needs of our different supply side options. So we've got an assessment of that. Obviously, desal is a consideration. And when you start to see desal coming through, then energy needs start to tick up. But even reservoirs have associated pumping costs. The east of England is very flat. Transfer schemes, there is very little gravity out there to be able to help move water to where it's needed. So energy costs are a consideration. And there was a separate question, I think, about grid as well. So obviously there's a lot in the news about the kind of constraints in grid, particularly in parts of the region. I think Cambridgeshire is mentioned. I'm sure Norfolk and Suffolk are similarly waiting for grid connections to come forward. That is going to be a risk. I mean, we do have to keep an eye on the availability of sufficient electricity in the right parts of the region to be able to connect our solutions to. And it is, as I say, there are risks with all these supply side schemes, and it's one of those things that we'll just have to track.
Thank you. Just on a general point, and I think this is for you, Daniel, what's the relationship between the regional plan, the individual water resource management plans, and there was a question, do we endorse the individual water resource management plans. Why is it that Water Resources South-East is waiting to publish their regional plan until the water resource management plans have been produced within their region? Why have we taken a different position? So if you could address that basket, that would be good, please.
Indeed. So yes, WRE is an independent body. We have a multi-sector board, and it actually is incumbent on the board to approve our regional plan. So it's the board itself that approves the regional plan. It's not a statutory plan, and therefore there is no need for the Environment Agency or DEFRA to approve our regional plan, allowing us to publish it at this stage. And we're set up differently to Water Resources South-East, who, in fact, as a regional group, is actually doing that kind of detailed water resource management planning on behalf of all the companies that operate and serve the population in that region. So therefore, it makes sense for Water Resources South-East to wait until that the whole regional plan is signed off before they kind of rubber stamp it and publish it as final. But that's not the case within the East. What we do have is all 4 of our member water companies have resubmitted their water resource management plans to DEFRA and the Environment Agency. And as I understand it, they are now awaiting ministerial signature. So there could, I guess, there is a scenario where some of the underlying details of individual schemes could be adjusted by water companies talking to regulators. But we didn't want to wait to that stage in order to finalise our regional plan and to move on with all the exciting things we've been talking about, supporting agriculture, seeing the reservoirs come to life and getting these schemes moving. So we wanted to draw a line in the sand, finalise our regional plan, encourage governments, DEFRA, regulators to sign off the company water resource management plans as soon as possible, because that will help, de-risk their delivery and get them moving as quickly as possible. And if there is any changes to those revised draft plans before they're finalised, we'll issue a brief update, an addendum, some point next year to explain if there's any final changes. But last time round, even though water resource management plans were submitted to DEFRA in good time, it then took at least a year for those revised drafts to be finally approved, and we didn't want to wait that long before we crack on with the next round.
Thank you. There's a question about whether or not Water Resources East can ask, it actually says lobby, Anglian Water Services to place their WINEP programme in the region hub GIS. I'm sure that we can ask them to do this, and we will ask them to do this because it will help things. Unfortunately, we can't get one of the Anglian Water people who are on the call to be able to answer that. But I think that if they could provide for some of these questions which are specific to water companies, I think what will be best done is we will actually get them to respond to those questions, and then we can post those within the Q&A. And I think that's the best way of doing that. But just to rest assured that we within WRE do promote these things, access to data, and we are asking and working with partners to ensure that happens. Question, have we looked into micro-domestic grey water reuse for demand management? And there's some questions as well around the use of water meters, and can WRE require water meters to be used? Could we promote greater use of water meters, and government to set policy to ensure that water meters are fitted at household level, not necessarily property level? Just our interaction with those measures and policy areas. I think it'd be helpful to clarify, Daniel.
Yeah, they're very happy to. So, well, we talked to DEFRA and DLUC and the Environment Agency on a number of different policy fronts, including the role and importance of smart metering. Our demand management strategy assumes, first of all, that Anglian Water rolls out smart metering basically to their entire kind of population set by 2030, and the other companies not long behind in 2035. So Cambridge Water will be quite quickly on Anglian Water's heels to roll out smart metering, and also moving to compulsory metering programs. as quickly as possible, because again, your smart metering helps spot leaks as well as to help customers manage their own supplies. And one of the kind of interesting developments of the last 6 months or so is a couple of new appointment and variation companies have applied for WRE membership. So we're delighted to welcome them to our strategic advisory group, because new appointment and variation companies are the water companies that supply many of the larger developments that are popping up across the east of England. So they manage the metering approach, and they manage the way in which kind of data is provided to customers. And one of the things we know we need to pick up with them is, what type of meters are they fitting? Are they fitting meters to every single property so that every kind of household can identify their own water use? And to make sure that the kind of data those smart meters comes up with is interoperable with the systems that Anglian, Cambridge, Affinity and Essex and Suffolk have. So I think, that whole area, both about encouraging the rollout of smart metering, bringing it forward as quickly as possible, working with the new appointment and variation companies, because smart metering, I think, is the backbone to our whole demand management strategy.
Okay, thanks. And just building on that, who's leading on behaviour change work in general, and how are folks going about reducing non-public water supply use?
Shall I pick it up for the public water supply and then maybe turn to Lindsay and to other, just from a water efficiency perspective? So I guess the first thing to say that, again, one of the developments of the last year or so is that Ofwat has identified £100 million. So £100 million, that's an awful lot of money to be putting into behaviour change campaigns. And they consulted earlier this year on how that money could best be spent. So it's probably not going to start, but might start to warm up in 2024 and really get going in 2025 as part of the next kind of asset management period. But there will be a really big focus on behaviour change for customers and a kind of sustained campaign to try and not only shift behaviours, but to sustain that kind of change over time. But maybe, Lindsay, should I talk to you about what's happening in the agricultural sector around water efficiency? There are some questions around kind of irrigation techniques, about kind of vertical farming as well. And so, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. Yes, there's a whole range of options and a lot of activity, and I guess a lot of it is driven by need and perception. So how water stressed do individual abstracted or water users perceive them to be, and as technology emerges and as it becomes more accessible and affordable, it is being taken up. And I think it's something that can come forward through the development of the Water Food Group and the development of an effective network of abstractor groups that we can help share best practice and develop ideas and open people's minds to doing things a different way. Yes, moving forward on many fronts and with lots of opportunity.
Thank you. Has any volumetric allowance been made for peak restoration within the supply-demand balance?
Shall I pick that one up unless Kate, do you want to come in? But well, not explicitly. I was part of the Lowland Agricultural Peak Task Force, particularly to kind of feed into that process what the kind of water resource needs and constraints might be, and also kind of thinking about kind of the balance between water scarcity and flood risk management when it comes to lowland peak landscapes. But essentially, it was very difficult to put a number on how much water may be needed to raise water tables, to re-wet peak landscapes, because it depends. It depends on what the topography is. It depends on what kinds of land we're talking about, what the different, what the kind of conditions are locally. So we've not got an explicit allowance. We talk about the Lowland Peak Task Force process, which of course we fully endorse Robert Caldwell's chair's report when it came out this year. But we've not yet got a number which tells us what water may be needed in future. I was going to just turn to kind of Giles, because you've got kind of practical experience on the ground of re-wetting projects, particularly in Norfolk and with the Broads Authority.
Yeah, so it's sort of linked with the peat and also the previous question about efficiency. It's a slightly different approach in as far as our infrastructure. We're looking at changing traditional assets to much more efficient assets, be it water control gates with better seals to hold back the water so we can raise them at the levels higher than then wet the ground. right the way through to pumping stations where we're using the latest technology, variable speed drive technology. So we pump the minimum water forward, so we retain as much water back. So that enables you to sort of tank that water in the system through the winter high flow period, and then that will obviously limit the loss during the summer, right the way through to what traditionally you would call grey infrastructure. So there is a project, Felixstowe Peninsula project, where we actually pump the water once it arrives at our pumping station through a pipework up to the 6 reservoirs, moving towards 9. And we've got a injection system putting the water into the aquifer, so recharging the ground. So all of these things will allow you to have a resource of water that enables multifunctional use of reservoirs at a local level, and this can be fed into the environment as well. So conversations are being had with DEFRA and other funding partners that are using the best of blended, public and private finance to make this happen. So we can't quantify it, but it's a no regrets investment policy we're taking at the moment, and that also includes works we're doing with the Environment Agency on solar panels and other green energy to help offset some of the environmental impacts of the electricity use.
Thanks, Charles. One potentially for Lindsay, and it's to do with the Food Farming and Countryside Commission land use framework. And are there any links between the work that the farming community and land management community are doing on the plan for water and the FFCC land use framework?
I'm not close enough to it to be able to comment in detail, Paul, but the two things are, they are intrinsically linked, aren't they? And so I'm sure there's work happening now, and as that whole concept develops, then it will come more out into the open, and more of us are get involved in the debate.
Yeah, and we are, although there was a promise that there was going to be a land use framework coming out in 2023, it's most probably increasingly unlikely that it's going to come out in 2023, but hopefully it'll come out in 2024.
But it does. Sorry.
No, Lindsay.
Well, I just say it probably does. It does sort of bring out this issue a little bit of, what is land used for? And I know we've got a water focus here, but there was this sort of trade-off between water for Cambridge and water, or for everything that's happening in Cambridge, and water for growing food. And it's, I mean, the whole of life is about trade-offs, isn't it? And so, but I remain optimistic that the more we debate these things and look at some very exciting new ideas. There's another comment on the chat about growing lettuce in a much more efficient way, and probably taking up a lot less land to do it. And Daniel has made reference to very intensive farming in the vertical farming kind of framework. Now, I don't think any one of these ideas is the answer, as it were. But the thing, what excites me is that we've just got so many different opportunities, so many different facets from which we can look at this, and we've got there's plenty of reason to remain optimistic.
Yeah. Potentially one for Barry, where Councillor Katie Thornborough says the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act 2023 is now law and includes chalk stream protection under Part 6 for environmental outcome reports. Does the WRE options take this new legislation into account? There's probably one rather not do they take it into account, but more generally, what are we hoping to do around chalk streams?
Yes, well, I think as Alice presented, the chalk streams are sort of given a priority in the plan, so they'll come online with the licence reductions, and investigations will have some priority around the chalk stream catchments moving forward. But as I outlined in my slides, the outcome of those investigations will drive the activity, and so we have to make sure we engage with those investigations, that all available data is made accessible to the water companies, and we take account of local information and knowledge to carry out those investigations, so that we can put in the right measures in place. So yeah, we very much hope that the chalk streams will have a priority within the plan and the resulting actions, but a lot of that is dependent on the investigations that will take place.
Yeah, thank you. And there is a comment which goes to the comment you made, Lindsay, around land use and what is the strategic approach to land use. And I think one of the things that the Cambridge Water Security or Water Scarcity Group discussions are forcing is a much more focused discussion around some of these issues. And so there is real engagement with the Levelling Up Department, with DEFRA on these as real issues that need to be addressed. So we'll be seeking, WRE will be seeking to play its role within all of those. Done that. Grid was discussed.
Paul, I was going to just maybe spend a moment about Cambridge, because clearly that is a really significant issue that's come forward in the last 6 months. And as you say, WRE has been part of the Cambridge Delivery Group process through the Water Scarcity Working Group since it all came together in the summer. I've been working with government on pushing forward with our policy priorities about building regulations, those drinking water regulations to allow communal supplies of non-potable water. To use water labelling, also to think about how water efficiency retrofit projects within existing homes and buildings and schools and hospitals and Cambridge University itself could be funded, potentially through developer contributions. WRE itself is being commissioned to look at higher projections of growth, the kinds of growth scenarios that Michael Gove set out in his long-term plan for housing, to see beyond the core proposals in our regional plan, how could you satisfy that degree of growth by 2040, looking both again at demand side options, but also at new supply side schemes. We're also supporting the process being kicked off for the agricultural sector, focusing on Cambridgeshire as the pilot area, looking for local resource options like winter storage reservoirs, effluent reuse, managed aquifer recharge, whilst also helping the Environment Agency with their consultants and the Water for Food Group look at how do we make sure that the kind of long-term needs for water for irrigation in the changing climate can be satisfied. And lastly, I think I mentioned this on the annual general meeting call earlier, but Water Resources East has been commissioned to open up a new nature-based front in Cambridgeshire to pick up the model we're developing in Norfolk for the chalk catchments, looking at how things like runoff attenuation features located in the right place, in the right catchment, at the right scale, can capture runoff, can hold that water and allow it to naturally infiltrate into the ground. We hope that the models which suggest that kind of approach could be really beneficial for replenishing groundwaters and supporting base flows will just take the pressure off the catchment, take the pressure off the chalk catchments and aquifers, so that you can have, the best of both worlds, at least some continuing sustainable growth that's made to be as water efficient as it possibly can be, reducing the water consumption within the existing building stock, but also using nature-based approaches to alleviate pressures and to deliver wider co-benefits.
Thank you. We've dealt with a lot of the questions. There are still some remaining. And our suggestion is that we bring this session to a close now, because we project to finish, or the timing for the completion of the launch was at 3:30. However, if people want to stay on so that we can address the other questions in a Q&A session once we've allowed people who want to go, that additional period won't be recorded, but we will be able to hear answers to the remaining questions. So if you want to stay on for an additional Q&A session after the formal closing of this launch event, then please do. If you want to go, then please do, and don't feel constrained to stay in any way. So just some closing thoughts. This has been an important milestone event for Water Resources the East. This has been the launch of the first regional water resources plan in the East, and we're already thinking about the next one, as Daniel has been saying. And we recognise, as Lindsay and others were saying, that we're only at the very start of multi-sector water resource planning. And also, when you look at the report, then the environment and making sure that we protect and improve the environment is at the heart and is the driving force for the most significant amount of abstraction reduction. So the environment is core throughout this plan. And our work with members and stakeholders will therefore continue with the aim of enhancing the evidence-based for this long-term cross-sector adaptive water planning. And that adaptive approach is key. We've got and clarified the actions that we'll take in the next 5 years. Those are no regret actions. When we come to produce the second report, we will then look at what the following 5 years of actions are in the light of the long-term planning, but again, on a no regrets basis. But if it isn't on a no regrets basis, then we have a fully informed discussion about what those choices are at that time. So there is clearly much more to do, but we've come a long way. And if we get this right, it will help improve the management of water, resulting in the restoration, protection, and improvement of the environment, and will also facilitate environmentally sustainable agricultural, housing, and economic growth in the Eastern region for present and future generations. It's a big task and a big ask, but by working together in this multi-sector way, I think it's possible. It's an aim well worth going for. So thank you for attending this webinar, and hope you found it useful, informative, and interesting. As I say, if you'd like to stay on for a Q&A session, then please do. And the recording of the event and all of the slides will be available as soon after the close of the session. And you'll also see here on this final slide ways that you can link with us on social media. So please do that. And thank you very much for attending. And I'll see you the other side of the official close for those who want to carry on with the QA. Thanks very much.